She was just out for a jog, but what happened next shocked the nation. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning in Houston, Texas. The kind where the sidewalks are still cool, the air is crisp, and the world feels like it's standing still for a moment. Judge Evelyn Brooks had laced up her sneakers, pulled on her hoodie, and stepped outside for her usual 3-mile jog, a peaceful ritual she relied on to clear her head before court. She had no idea that within the hour her name would be trending across the country. To the world, Evelyn was more than just a jogger. She was a powerful federal judge known for her fierce commitment to justice and her rulings on high-profile cases involving police misconduct and racial bias. But to Officer Jack Barnes, a 10-year patrol veteran of that suburban neighborhood, all he saw was a black woman in athletic gear who didn't look like she belonged. What happened next was more than a misunderstanding. It was a gut-wrenching reminder of how quickly power can be abused, and how even those sworn to uphold the law can weaponize it against the very people they're meant to protect. Evelyn's arrest, humiliation, and physical assault inside a jail cell would ignite a firestorm of outrage, spark sweeping reform, and expose a truth far bigger than one bad cop. This is the story of what happens when one brave woman refuses to stay silent, and why her fight is far from over. Profiled while jogging, the day a black federal judge was treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. It started like any other morning. The sun had just begun to rise over Houston, Texas, casting a warm golden glow across the quiet tree-lined streets of a suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people believed they were safe, where lawns were perfectly trimmed, sprinklers ticked to life at 6 o'clock a.m., and folks walked their dogs without a second thought. For Judge Evelyn Brooks, this was her sanctuary. She had lived here for nearly 6 years, just a 20-minute drive from the federal courthouse downtown where she presided over some of the state's most complex and controversial cases. That morning, Evelyn stepped outside wearing a simple gray hoodie, black leggings, and well-worn running shoes. Her Fitbit buzzed as she began her 3-mile jog, a daily habit that grounded her. The cool breeze brushed against her skin as she ran past quiet houses and empty sidewalks, her gym bag slung crossbody like always, earbuds tucked in, listening to a podcast about constitutional law. To anyone who knew her, she looked like herself, focused, calm, a woman of discipline. But to someone who didn't know her, someone whose worldview had been shaped by bias and suspicion, she looked like a threat. Officer Jack Barnes had been parked just around the corner, sipping lukewarm coffee and scanning the neighborhood like he had 1,000 mornings before. A 10-year veteran of the Houston Police Department, Jack prided himself on knowing his territory. He claimed he could spot a stranger from 100 feet away. So when he saw Evelyn jogging past with her hood up and a small gym bag bouncing at her hip, something in him tightened. "She doesn't look familiar," he muttered to himself. "What's she doing here?" To Jack, Evelyn wasn't a respected member of the community. She wasn't a federal judge who had dedicated her life to upholding the Constitution. She wasn't even someone he paused to get to know. She was just a black woman in a hoodie, sweating, jogging, and existing in what he assumed was the wrong place. As Evelyn paused at a park bench to stretch her arms and sip from her water bottle, a small receipt fluttered out of her pocket and landed near the curb. It was from a well-known upscale boutique downtown, where she had stopped the day before to buy a gift for a colleague. She didn't notice it fall. Jack did. He stepped out of his cruiser, heart racing, not with fear, but with adrenaline. To him, this was what good cops do: stop something before it happens. He didn't ask questions. He didn't check records. He didn't recognize her face from the courthouse banners downtown. All he saw was what he thought didn't belong. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice clipped and commanding. Evelyn turned calm and composed. "Yes, officer?" Jack held up the crumpled receipt. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. Evelyn blinked, surprised. "That's mine," she said simply. "I must have dropped it." He didn't like her answer. "These are expensive items," he said, his tone laced with doubt. "Mind telling me what's in your bag?" Evelyn hesitated, not because she had anything to hide, but because she understood exactly what was happening. She had ruled on cases just like this, black men and women profiled, stopped, questioned without cause. And now it was happening to her. "Officer," she said carefully, "I don't believe I've done anything wrong." That answer pushed Jack over the edge. Her confidence, her calm, it didn't read as professionalism to him. It read as defiance. "If you're not hiding anything," and he snapped, "then let me see the bag." She shook her head gently. "You don't have probable cause," she said, voice firm but steady. That was enough. Jack's face darkened. Without hesitation, he reached for his cuffs. "Turn around," he barked. "You're resisting an investigation." Resisting, investigating, big words used to justify small-minded actions. Evelyn froze, not out of fear but out of disbelief. A part of her wanted to laugh, another part wanted to cry, but mostly she felt what so many before her had felt, the sting of being reduced to a stereotype. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. But Jack wasn't listening. The cuffs clamped around her wrists like cold betrayal. He led her to the patrol car as neighbors peeked through their windows and joggers slowed their pace, phones coming out to record the scene. To them, it looked like a routine arrest. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of a reckoning, because Officer Jack Barnes had just handcuffed a federal judge, and this time his assumptions were about to cost him everything. No probable cause, no problem. How one officer turned a morning jog into a national scandal. It should have ended right there. A question asked, an answer given, a polite nod, maybe even an apology. Instead, what happened next turned a routine moment into a civil rights nightmare, and Evelyn Brooks into a symbol of justice betrayed. Standing on that quiet sidewalk, cuffed in broad daylight, Judge Evelyn Brooks tried to steady her breath. Her heart was pounding, not out of guilt, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. She wasn't just being accused of theft, she was being dehumanized, treated as if her very existence in that neighborhood was an offense. Her crime? Jogging while black with a luxury receipt in her pocket. Officer Jack Barnes wasn't interested in the truth. He was already building his narrative. He had found a crumpled receipt on the ground, and in his mind, it was a smoking gun. The gym bag Evelyn carried now looked, to him, like a sack of stolen goods. Never mind that he had no witness, no report of a crime, no video footage, no probable cause. All he had was a gut feeling shaped by bias. Evelyn, despite being taken by surprise, never raised her voice. She didn't argue, but she also didn't surrender her dignity. "You don't have the right to search my belongings without cause," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You haven't even told me what crime you think I committed." Jack scoffed, stepping closer, puffing up like a bantam rooster. "You're acting suspicious," he barked, repeating it like it was a charge in itself. "You hesitated. You dropped this receipt. You fit the description." "Whose description?" Evelyn asked quietly. He didn't answer. To him, a black woman in a hoodie was enough. He didn't know or care that she wore that hoodie every morning to jog, or that the bag he feared so much contained nothing more than a water bottle, a spare phone charger, and a folded court brief. He didn't ask, he assumed. And in that moment, Evelyn knew that the law she had spent 25 years defending was being twisted into a weapon against her. Still, she tried one last time. "Officer," Schwab said gently, "I'm Judge Evelyn Brooks. I have no idea what you think I've done, but I promise you you're making a terrible mistake." And that's when it became personal. Jack's jaw tightened. His pride wouldn't let him back down. He heard Judge and saw a challenge, a woman standing her ground, a black woman daring to assert her rights. To him, that wasn't professionalism. That was disrespect. Without another word, he reached for his cuffs. "Turn around," he snapped. "You're resisting an investigation." The cold metal dug into her wrists. Her gym bag was yanked from her shoulder. He never even opened it in front of her. He didn't bother to check the ID inside. The truth didn't matter. The appearance of control did. Neighbors began to gather. A dog walker stopped, mid-stride, pulling out her phone. A cyclist slowed and circled back. The scene was too jarring to ignore. A woman in athletic wear standing barefoot on the pavement, her hands cuffed behind her back, calmly talking to a police officer whose voice was growing louder by the second. "She's a judge," someone whispered. "I think she's a judge." But Jack wasn't listening. He shoved her gently but firmly toward the back seat of his cruiser, his voice rising for effect. "Suspected theft, refused to comply, resisted questioning," he said aloud, rehearsing the report in his head before it was even written. Evelyn sat in the back of that car like a statue. She refused to cry, refused to beg, But inside, a storm was raging. Not just for her, but for every person who had ever been handcuffed without cause, arrested because of the color of their skin, accused because they didn't fit someone else's image of belonging. And she knew something else. If this could happen to her, a federal judge, what chance did others have? Back at the station, the injustice continued. Jack walked her through booking like she was just another criminal, tossing the boutique receipt onto the desk like it was Exhibit A. The booking officer barely looked up. It was just another case, another code on the clipboard. Evelyn's name hadn't even registered. "I'd like to make a phone call," she said firmly. Jack laughed. "You'll get one when I say you do." The words hung in the air like a slap, laced with condescension, contempt, and unchecked power. It wasn't about law enforcement anymore. It was about dominance. The irony, the woman he was trying to silence had written legal opinions on police misconduct. She had helped train new attorneys on civil rights law. She had ruled on cases of wrongful arrest. And now, here she was, living it. But she wasn't going to stay silent. As the cell door slammed behind her, Evelyn made herself a promise. She wouldn't just clear her name, she would burn the whole narrative down. Because this wasn't just an unlawful arrest. It was the spark that would expose something far deeper. Something rotten. And Officer Jack Barnes? He had no idea the storm he had just unleashed. Slapped behind bars, the day a judge was treated like a nobody. The holding cell was just 8 feet wide and maybe 10 feet long, bare concrete walls, a cold steel bench, and a flickering overhead light that hummed like a mosquito trapped in a jar. But it wasn't the space that chilled Judge Evelyn Brooks. It was the silence. The kind of silence that wraps around you like a noose. The kind that swallows, screams, and buries justice. For the first time in decades, Evelyn wasn't sitting on the bench of a courtroom. She was the one behind bars, still in her joggers, still with sweat on her brow. But now she was also bruised, emotionally and soon physically. Jack Barnes strutted the hallway like a man who had won something. His boots clapped against the tile floor with cocky rhythm. He stopped in front of her cell, his grin wide, his voice dipped in mockery. "You're awfully quiet in there," he said, leaning casually against the bars. "What, cat got your tongue?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked at him with a stare that judges save for liars on the witness stand. Calm, cold, and cutting. But she said nothing. She refused to let him pull her into his performance. That silence, it got under his skin. "You think you're better than me?" he snapped. "You think you can look down on me?" His tone shifted from cocky to hostile. "Let me tell you something. You're not special. Not in here." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the red in his eyes and the twitch in his jaw. "I could make things worse for you," he said, voice low like a threat in the dark. "A lot worse." Evelyn stood up slowly, her composure unwavering. She didn't raise her voice, didn't meet his anger with hers. She just said 6 words. "You've already made a mistake, officer." And that was it. The words sliced through his pride like a razor. In a flash, his hand shot through the bars. The slap landed hard across Evelyn's cheek, a crack that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. The sting lit up her skin. Her head turned slightly from the impact, but she didn't stumble. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She turned back to face him and looked him dead in the eye. That was Evelyn Brooks. Even bruised, she stood taller than him. Jack, breathing heavy, stepped back. For a moment, even he looked surprised at what he'd done. But that surprise didn't last. Instead, he sneered. "People like you don't get second chances," he hissed. Evelyn sat back down on the cold bench, one hand gently covering the side of her face. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Not from fear, but from fury. Quiet, disciplined fury. She had seen this kind of man before. The kind who thinks authority means immunity. The kind who mistakes silence for submission. But she wasn't afraid of Jack Barnes. She was afraid of the system that let him thrive. Behind that door, he was a uniform with a badge and unchecked power. And right now, no one knew she was here. She glanced at the wall. There was no clock, but she knew at least 30 minutes had passed since her arrest. Maybe an hour. Her phone was in her bag, locked away somewhere. Her attorney hadn't been notified. No one had spoken her name. And here, in a place designed to disappear people, even a federal judge could become invisible. She thought about others, about how many names had gone unknown, How many women had sat in cells like this, bruised and silent? How many never got out? That was the moment fear crept in, not for herself, but for the countless people who weren't judges, who didn't know their rights, who couldn't call a lawyer, who didn't have a city official ready to storm the precinct on their behalf. And then, footsteps, soft, hesitant, not Jack's. Evelyn looked up as a younger officer appeared at the bars. His uniform looked newer, less worn. His eyes darted nervously down the hall before meeting hers. "Ma'am," he whispered, "are, are you okay?" It was Officer Ryan Daniels, the one who had questioned Jack's reasoning earlier. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She studied him. He didn't carry the arrogance Jack wore like a shield. His voice was shaky, but his gaze was steady. "I'll be fine," she said, even though her cheek still burned. "But I need to make a phone call." Daniels hesitated. His hand hovered near his keys like a magnet being pulled in two directions. "I'm not supposed to," he muttered. "You know this isn't right," Evelyn said, her voice softer than it had been with Jack, but every bit as firm. "If you walk away now, he wins." Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "If Barnes finds out, if you don't help me," she interrupted gently, "this will keep happening, and next time it might be someone without a voice." He froze, and then slowly he reached for the keys. With a quiet click, the cell door opened. "I'll take you to the phone," he whispered, "but you need to be quick." That moment, one small act of courage in the shadow of abuse, would change everything. Because what Jack Barnes didn't realize when he slapped Evelyn Brooks was that he didn't silence her. He woke her up, and her voice was just getting started. This wasn't his first time. What one file revealed about Officer Barnes will shock you. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, but slowly and not nearly fast enough for Judge Evelyn Brooks. Released from her cell, cheeks still marked with the outline of Jack Barnes's hand, she sat across from her attorney in a quiet office within the police precinct. Her posture was straight, her face composed, but her eyes held a storm. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice unwavering. "This is about every person who's ever been silenced and dismissed because someone like him decided they didn't belong." Her attorney nodded solemnly, flipping open a growing stack of paperwork. Formal complaints, internal memos, video screen grabs, and in the center of it all, Evelyn's own recorded conversation, the one where Jack threatened her, humiliated her, and violated every code of professional conduct. But then, something changed. A knock at the door interrupted their review. An internal affairs investigator stepped in, clutching a thick manila folder, his face pale. "You'll want to see this," he said quietly, placing the file on the desk. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "It's a sealed case from 2 years ago," he replied. "We weren't supposed to find it. It was buried." The name on the folder, Isaac Taylor. Her heart skipped. Evelyn had heard that name before. A 19-year-old black college student, arrested on suspicion of burglary while walking home from his part-time job in Midtown Houston. No charges were filed. No one ever explained why. It was just another story that faded into the background noise of injustice. She opened the file, and what she saw made her blood run cold. There were glaring gaps in Officer Barnes's report, missing timestamps, inconsistent witness statements, no official body cam footage. Jack had written that Isaac had acted suspiciously and refused to cooperate. It was the same language he had used with her, word for word in some places. But what chilled her most? The note scribbled in the margin. "Body cam malfunctioned. No usable footage." "Convenient," her attorney muttered. "Too convenient." The pattern was undeniable, the arrogance of it, the repeat offenses, and now, finally, a trail. Evelyn's jaw tightened. How many more have there been? That question didn't take long to answer. Once investigators began digging deeper, the dominoes fell fast. There were 6 more names, all black or brown, all arrested by Officer Jack Barnes under the guise of suspicion, all dismissed quietly. None followed up, until now. One man was arrested while unlocking the front door of his own house. A woman was handcuffed while loading groceries into her trunk because she looked like someone Jack claimed was on a watch list. Each story a carbon copy of Evelyn's. Same phrases, same tone, same abuse of power. The system had protected him. until now. And just when they thought they'd seen it all, a second knock came. A retired officer stood at the door, gray-haired, weathered, with a look of regret carved into every line of his face. "I heard what happened," he said, "and I can't stay quiet anymore." Evelyn and her attorney listened as the man shared his burden, one he'd carried for years. He had worked alongside Jack Barnes, had watched his behavior escalate, had seen complaints disappear, reports rewritten, footage lost. And then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a dusty USB drive. "I kept copies," he said, "just in case. I didn't think I'd ever use them, but now I know I should have spoken up long ago." The room fell silent. That drive, once plugged into a laptop, lit the screen with time-stamped body cam footage, long thought deleted. And what it revealed would shake the precinct to its foundation. There was Jack Barnes on video, threatening a teenager. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me?" he sneered. There he was again, mocking a woman in cuffs, calling her just another mouthy one. Video after video, encounter after encounter. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a career built on intimidation, profiling, and unchecked power. Evelyn stared at the screen, her voice steady but sharp. "This is no longer just a case. This is a pattern, a system, and we're about to expose it all." That moment marked a turning point, not just in Evelyn's personal fight, but in a citywide reckoning. Because what started as one wrongful arrest was now a bombshell of systemic abuse. Jack Barnes had written his own downfall, and now the whole world would read it. Handcuffs, headlines, and hashtags. How one arrest ignited a movement. The footage hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within hours, millions had seen the image. A respected federal judge, black, female, and visibly composed, being handcuffed on a tree-lined street in Houston by a white officer whose face screamed arrogance. The hashtags were immediate. Justice for Evelyn. She is the judge. A profiling exposed for Judge Evelyn Brooks. The moment of humiliation had already passed. She had walked out of the precinct with her head high and her dignity intact, but she knew what was coming next would be far louder and far more powerful than anything she could do alone. America was watching, and America was angry. News outlets from New York to Los Angeles ran the story every hour on the hour. Federal judge wrongfully arrested while jogging. Every talk show, podcast, and live panel was talking about it. The details were damning. The audio was worse. When Evelyn's calm voice played against Officer Jack Barnes's hostile tone, the contrast was impossible to ignore. "Do you know who I am?" She had never asked, but the world was answering on her behalf. At the gates of the precinct, a crowd of 50 became 500 overnight. By the weekend, they were in the thousands, holding signs, chanting her name, demanding accountability. One poster read, "She had a law degree, he had a badge. Guess who got cuffed?" Across social media, people began sharing their own stories. Black and brown Americans detailing eerily similar experiences. A jog, a bag, a hoodie, and then the assumption, the accusation, the arrest. Evelyn watched it unfold from her home office. Her inbox flooded with messages, some from strangers, some from survivors. One email simply read, "I was Isaac Taylor 5 years ago. No one believed me. Now they will." She knew the responsibility was growing. This wasn't about her anymore. She had become the face of something much larger. So she did what she had always done. She stood up and spoke out. At a hastily organized town hall meeting, broadcast live and viewed by over 7 million people across the country, Evelyn stepped up to the microphone. Her black blazer crisp, her voice clear. "What happened to me," she began, "wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of a broken culture, one that teaches suspicion over service and fear over fairness." The room was silent. Even the reporter stopped typing. "I was lucky," she continued. "I had resources. I knew my rights. But what about the 16-year-old who doesn't? What about the mother walking home with groceries? The father picking up his child from school?" She paused, scanning the sea of faces, some nodding, some wiping away tears. "It's not just about bad apples," she said, her voice rising. "It's about the orchard, and the orchard needs pruning." Applause erupted, loud and sustained. But Evelyn wasn't looking for cheers. She was calling for change. Outside the hall, protests continued. Candlelight vigils were held. Local artists painted murals of Evelyn with the words, "Truth is power." A 6-foot portrait of her in her judge's robe was painted on a downtown Houston wall facing the courthouse. Even celebrities took notice. A Grammy-winning artist tweeted, "Judge Evelyn Brooks is what leadership looks like. Respect, justice, change. She is the judge." But not all attention was welcome. Some conservative outlets tried to spin the story, painting Jack Barnes as a cop just doing his job. They accused Evelyn of playing the victim, but their arguments fell flat against the facts. Audio recordings, surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and a USB drive that wouldn't stop revealing more. Everywhere she went, Evelyn saw the shift. People honking in support, strangers thanking her in coffee shops, young girls pointing and saying, "That's the judge." Still, she didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as a reminder that justice, no matter how blindfolded, must never be deaf. A reminder that silence is complicity, and that sometimes all it takes is one arrest, one mistake, one woman refusing to be broken, to start a reckoning. The fire had started, and Evelyn Brooks wasn't walking away from the flames. She was leading people through them. From courtroom to crisis, how a judge's arrest shattered the blue wall. What Officer Jack Barnes thought was just another day on patrol turned out to be the spark that would ignite a legal firestorm. One that burned through not just his career, but the very foundation of a police department that had long operated in the shadows of unaccountability. When Judge Evelyn Brooks made her phone call, she didn't just dial her attorney, she triggered a domino effect. Within 24 hours, a formal complaint had been filed with the Houston Police Internal Affairs Division. Within 48 hours, the district attorney had opened an independent investigation. And by the end of the week, state and federal officials were asking one chilling question: how many more like her have there been? The footage was undeniable. The transcript of the encounter read like a case study in civil rights abuse: no probable cause, no Miranda rights, and a blatant disregard for protocol. The entire incident unfolded in just under 10 minutes, but its consequences would stretch for miles. Evelyn's legal team moved fast. Backed by a team of constitutional law experts, they filed a civil rights lawsuit citing false arrest, racial profiling, and use of excessive force. But this wasn't just about monetary damages. Evelyn wasn't seeking a payout. She was seeking precedent. "We are not here to collect a check," her lead attorney, Malcolm Reed, told reporters in a press conference held just steps from the federal courthouse. "We are here to hold power accountable, to set a new standard, to say once and for all that no badge is above the Constitution." And the courts listened. A federal judge fast-tracked the case under Section 1983, a statute that allows citizens to sue government officials who violate their civil rights under color of law. It was the same legal tool once used during the civil rights movement, and now it was being sharpened once more. But the courtroom was just one front in this battle. Behind the scenes, the Houston Police Department was scrambling. Internal memos leaked to the press showed frantic damage control. Officers were being called into emergency sensitivity training. Supervisors were instructed to review all previous stops involving Officer Barnes over the last 5 years. And perhaps most damning of all, a long-buried personnel file surfaced, one that showed multiple complaints against Barnes, including at least 3 prior accusations of racial bias, all dismissed without a full investigation. The mayor's office, under pressure from both the public and state leaders, called for an external audit of the department. A task force was assembled, made up of civil rights leaders, legal scholars, former law enforcement officials, and community advocates. Their mission: root out the systemic issues that allowed this to happen in the first place. And the results were devastating. The task force uncovered patterns of misconduct that stretched back over a decade. Patterns that included fabricated reports, tampered dashcam footage, coerced confessions, and a culture of silence among officers. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a rot that had been allowed to grow unchecked. Meanwhile, Officer Barnes, once seen swaggering through the halls of the precinct, was now suspended without pay, facing both civil and criminal charges. His union lawyer attempted damage control, claiming Jack had acted on instinct and that training gaps were to blame. But the public wasn't buying it. Neither was the grand jury. In a dramatic courtroom moment, Barnes was formally indicted on 3 counts: violation of civil rights under color of law, assault of a federal officer, obstruction of justice. Each count carried up to 10 years in federal prison. As news broke, headlines across the country reflected the gravity of the moment. Houston cop who arrested federal judge faces federal charges. Justice flips the script. Officer indicted, judge empowered. The gavel hits back. Back in Evelyn's chambers, she watched the coverage with the same composure she wore in the courtroom. But inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She knew justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance, about making sure no one, whether 5 feet or 6'4", with or without a badge, got to decide who belonged and who didn't based on the color of their skin. And the message was spreading. Legal scholars began using her case in university lectures. Civil rights attorneys across the nation began reopening cold cases, armed with new precedent. One law school even announced a scholarship in her name, the Evelyn Brooks Justice Fellowship, aimed at supporting young Black women entering the legal field. Inside police departments across the country, reforms were gaining traction. New standards were being proposed: mandatory body cams with real-time streaming, racial bias retraining every 6 months, citizen oversight panels with subpoena power, a federal registry for officers with sustained misconduct allegations. The tide was turning, not because Evelyn Brooks shouted, but because she stood, unshaken, unyielding, unapologetic. Jack Barnes had tried to silence her, but in doing so, he gave her a microphone. And the system, it was finally listening. Buried truths resurface, the forgotten case that changed everything. Just when the storm seemed to be calming, a forgotten file cracked the case wide open. While investigators combed through Jack Barnes's record, buried beneath years of departmental dust and digital neglect, they stumbled upon a sealed incident report dated 2 years earlier. Faded, misfiled, and marked resolved, but never truly closed. One name jumped out from the page like a ghost demanding justice: Isaac Taylor. A 19-year-old Black college freshman, Isaac had been arrested by Officer Barnes in a neighborhood just 1.2 miles from where Judge Evelyn Brooks had been wrongfully detained. The report claimed he was loitering near a jewelry store, acting suspicious and uncooperative. But there were no eyewitnesses, no stolen goods, no video evidence. The body cam footage was mysteriously corrupted. Sound familiar? When the lead investigator flipped through the report, something didn't sit right. The language, the lack of detail, the abrupt conclusion. It was textbook cover-up. And in light of Evelyn Brooks's high-profile case, it became impossible to ignore. "Get this to Judge Brooks, now," the investigator said, slamming the file closed. When Evelyn saw Isaac's name, her expression shifted. She remembered it. "I heard whispers about this case 2 years ago," she said quietly to her attorney. "It never went to court. He just disappeared from the system." Until now. A team was quickly dispatched to track Isaac down. They found him living quietly in a small apartment just outside Houston, working part-time and trying to finish school. When approached, Isaac was hesitant. "Why now?" he asked, eyes filled with years of silent frustration. "No one believed me before." But Evelyn looked him in the eye and said, "They'll believe you now because I do." At the next press conference, with cameras flashing and reporters jostling for position, Evelyn stepped to the podium. But this time, she didn't stand alone. Isaac Taylor stood beside her, taller now, but still carrying the weight of what had happened. "You all know my story," Evelyn began, her voice calm but firm. "But Isaac's story came first, and it could have ended in silence, if not for what happened to me. This isn't coincidence, this is a pattern." Isaac took the mic, his hands trembling at first. "I was just walking home," he said. "That's it. I had a backpack and headphones in." He said I looked out of place. He pushed me up against the wall and said I fit the description. I never even knew what I was being accused of. His words struck a nerve with America. Cable news channels replayed the clip. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #JusticeForIsaac and #PatternNotAccident started trending nationwide. Celebrities, athletes, and activists amplified the story. Some even offered legal aid. The nation wasn't just listening, it was demanding answers. And that's when a retired officer came forward. He had worked with Jack Barnes early in his career. He claimed Barnes had a history of targeting black youth, pulling them over for no reason, detaining them without cause, and using vague terms like suspicious to justify aggressive stops. I looked the other way, he said, placing a dusty USB drive on Evelyn's desk, but not anymore. That USB contained archived body cam footage that Barnes thought was deleted, footage showing him mocking suspects, tampering with reports, and most damningly, interacting with Isaac Taylor on the day of the arrest. In the grainy video, Barnes's voice was crystal clear. "You look like trouble. Don't act like you don't know what I mean." Isaac never resisted. He never raised his voice. He just kept saying, "I didn't do anything." But Barnes didn't care. This footage, this damning evidence, became the missing puzzle piece Evelyn needed to prove what she'd suspected all along. Jack Barnes's behavior wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a system, a rot. The clip aired on national television. It became part of the congressional hearing on police misconduct. Lawmakers used it to highlight why body cams need stricter oversight and why internal reviews should never be trusted without third-party accountability. Meanwhile, Evelyn's legal team reopened Isaac's case, filing a motion to vacate the original arrest record and clear his name publicly. The judge granted it. "Mr. Taylor, the record will reflect that you were wrongfully detained and this arrest should never have occurred," the judge declared from the bench. For Isaac, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was personal vindication. "I thought I'd carry this forever," he said after the hearing, "but today I'm free, not just from the record, but from the shame they made me feel." As for Evelyn, this moment became her rallying cry. "We are not just telling stories," she said, "we're exposing patterns. And it's time the system answers for them." This chapter of their story reminded America that the past is never really gone. It just waits, buried beneath paperwork and sealed folders, until someone brave enough brings it back to light. Jack Barnes thought Isaac's file would stay hidden forever. But Evelyn Brooks knew the truth always finds a way to rise. When the cameras rolled, America watched and roared back. The moment Judge Evelyn Brooks and Isaac Taylor stepped into the spotlight together, the nation held its breath. Their story, two people, 2 years apart, both victims of the same officer's prejudice, struck a nerve that reverberated far beyond Houston. And when the body cam footage hit the airwaves, the response was immediate, fiery, and impossible to ignore. Cable news anchors broke their segments. "We interrupt this program with breaking news," one voice said solemnly. "New footage reveals a pattern of abuse by Officer Jack Barnes, including the wrongful arrests of both a federal judge and a black college student." The 45-second clip of Isaac Taylor's silent compliance, of Barnes barking at him like a criminal, played on a loop across networks. And Evelyn's voice, clear, calm, unwavering, added a weight of authority few could ignore. "This is not about one man," she said on national television. "It's about a system that protected him." And within hours, hashtags like #Justice for Evelyn and #I Stand with Isaac trended on Twitter, now X. TikTok creators broke down the story in 3-minute bursts. Celebrities reposted the clip. Athletes wore black armbands embroidered with EB and IT. Talk show hosts dedicated entire monologues to the case. Even Oprah weighed in, calling Evelyn a beacon of grace under fire. And then came the marches in over 25 cities across the U.S. People took to the street. Boys stood to the streets, holding handmade signs, many showing Evelyn's photo juxtaposed with Isaac's, above the words, "How many more?" In downtown Houston, a peaceful rally filled over 12 city blocks, stretching more than 1.5 miles. Protesters chanted, "No justice, no peace," and "She was a judge and still not safe." Police helicopters hovered above, but the crowd remained focused, unified, and resolute. The message was loud and clear. This wasn't just Evelyn's story, it was America's. Local news couldn't keep up. "I've never seen anything like it," one Houston anchor said. "She's not just a judge now, she's a symbol." And the ripple effects reached Washington, D.C. Senators called for emergency hearings. Civil rights leaders demanded federal investigations. Public defenders across the country began pulling records, wondering how many more Isaacs were hidden behind closed doors. And then came the press conference that shifted the tide entirely. With dozens of reporters crammed into the courthouse steps, Judge Evelyn Brooks stood before a bank of microphones, not to defend herself, but to demand change. We need better training. We need independent review boards. We need national accountability standards for every officer in this country, she said, her voice steady. Because if someone with my credentials and experience can be handcuffed on a sidewalk just for jogging while black, then no one is safe. Not your sons, not your daughters, not your neighbors. Her words were clipped into 15-second sound bites. Her image flashed across Times Square, Hollywood billboards, and subway platforms in Chicago. The internet dubbed her America's Justice Warrior. Even high school students in Milwaukee staged a walkout in solidarity. We're taught the law is blind, one teen said into a local news mic, but it's not, and we're not going to pretend anymore. Across platforms, Evelyn Brooks became more than a judge. She became a movement. Her inbox flooded with letters, some handwritten, some typed, from victims, from families, from people who'd felt invisible until her voice echoed their truth. One message, scribbled on a postcard from Georgia, read simply, "Because of you, I finally feel seen." Meanwhile, Jack Barnes's name became synonymous with disgrace. Memes mocked his arrogance. Editorials condemned his actions. Civil rights organizations called for his prosecution, not just termination. The Houston Police Department's official social media pages were inundated with thousands of comments, many demanding answers, most demanding reform. Under pressure, the department pledged to cooperate fully with the federal inquiry and immediately suspended 4 other officers linked to similar complaints. The message was clear. This wasn't a blip. It was a reckoning. And at the heart of it all stood Evelyn, not for fame, not for revenge, but for justice. "This isn't over," she said in a nationally televised interview. "This is only the beginning. The files he buried are digging his grave." While the protests roared in the streets and Judge Evelyn Brooks became the voice of a movement, a different kind of storm was building inside the precinct, quieter, colder, and far more damning. It started with a simple review. The department had no choice. After national outrage and political pressure, they launched a full-scale internal investigation into Officer Jack Barnes. A task force of senior investigators, some from out of state to ensure impartiality, was brought in. Their assignment: comb through every report, every arrest, every complaint tied to Barnes over the past 10 years. What they found was staggering. In the first 72 hours alone, the team uncovered 17 citizen complaints, 9 of them involving black individuals, all flagged for racial bias. Several had been marked resolved without proper follow-up. Others were mysteriously missing audio or body cam footage. The patterns were impossible to ignore: vague descriptions, suspicious behavior without detail, charges that were later dropped, and individuals who had felt too powerless or too scared to fight back. But one folder changed everything. A junior analyst, sifting through a dusty drawer of archived files, stumbled upon a case that had been sealed and buried deep in the system. The report was dated 2 years prior. The name on the palm, Isaac Taylor. The file was riddled with red flags. Isaac, just 20 years old at the time, had been arrested by Barnes for theft in progress. But there was no surveillance footage, no witness statement, and no stolen items ever recovered. The body cam footage, marked as device malfunctions, a tech audit later showed the cam had been manually disabled during the arrest window, something that violates department policy and is grounds for disciplinary action. The more the team dug, the deeper the rot went. Jack Barnes hadn't just been arrogant. He had been protected. A culture of silence, a chain of lost files and fellow officers who looked the other way had allowed him to operate unchecked. But the department's shield was cracking fast. An anonymous tip came through the internal hotline. A retired officer now living in Phoenix, Arizona, wanted to talk on record. He had worked alongside Barnes for 6 years and confessed he had once covered up a questionable stop involving a Latino teenager. "I didn't say anything then," he admitted, "but I won't carry the weight of this anymore." Evelyn Brooks, she gave us all a reason to finally speak up. 2 days later, the retired officer handed over a USB drive. What it contained shook the entire room to silence. The drive included over 4 hours of body cam footage Barnes had allegedly deleted or never filed properly. It showed multiple stops where he berated, threatened, and unjustly searched civilians, almost all of them Black or Latino. In one clip, he pulled over a young man simply for looking lost and forced him out of his car at gunpoint. Another showed him detaining a woman for loitering outside a coffee shop, despite her being a barista on break. The files were cross-checked. None of these incidents had been logged. Now the investigators had what they needed: a timeline, a pattern, and undeniable proof. This wasn't just a rogue officer. This was a walking lawsuit and a symbol of a system that had turned a blind eye for far too long. Within 48 hours, the precinct's chief suspended 4 other officers for failing to report or acting as silent bystanders in past Barnes incidents. The case was officially escalated to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, which flew in attorneys and analysts from Washington, D.C. to begin their own inquiry. Barnes, meanwhile, had gone silent. His lawyer issued a statement claiming the officer had always acted in good faith, but public sentiment had already turned. News outlets from New York to Los Angeles ran with headlines like, "The cop who thought he was untouchable," "Buried files, broken trust, inside Barnes's trail of injustice," "Body cam lies and badges of silence." Social media exploded again. TikTokers broke down each clip from the USB drive, adding commentary, reenactments, and legal insights. Twitter threads exposed Barnes's arrest stats, showing that over 80% of those arrested in his patrol zone were people of color, in a neighborhood that was only 45% non-white. But perhaps the most heartbreaking were the messages from those he had wronged. One man, now in his 30s, wrote in an open letter, "I spent 14 days in county jail because of Jack Barnes. I lost my job. I lost custody of my daughter. I never spoke up because I thought no one would believe me. Now I know I wasn't alone." That letter went viral, shared over 1.2 million times in 24 hours. And in the midst of it all, Evelyn Brooks stayed steady. She reviewed the findings. She met with civil rights attorneys. And most importantly, she vowed that these stories, these lives, wouldn't be buried again. "This isn't just a moment," she told CNN. "This is a mandate, and I'm going to make sure it leads to real lasting change." The case against Jack Barnes was no longer just about Evelyn's wrongful arrest. It had become a mirror held up to the entire justice system, and America was finally starting to look. The trial that shook the system, one woman's truth versus a wall of blue. The courtroom was packed. Not a single bench sat empty. Reporters lined the back wall with cameras rolling. Protesters gathered on the courthouse steps, their signs waving in the humid Houston air like flags of reckoning. Everyone knew this wasn't just a trial. This was a reckoning in real time. And at the center of it all stood Judge Evelyn Brooks. But today, she wasn't presiding. She was testifying. The prosecution opened strong, making it clear that this wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about a pattern of abuse, years in the making. This case, the prosecutor began, is not just about one officer's mistake. It's about a system that allowed him to act with impunity until now. Exhibit A, the USB drive containing over 4 hours of recovered body cam footage Jack Barnes believed he had erased forever. When the footage was played for the jury, the courtroom went silent. In clip after clip, Barnes could be seen taunting, harassing, and illegally detaining Black and Latino citizens, often with no cause other than his own bias. At one point, he sneered to a young man, "Nobody's going to believe you over me. I'm the law here." The jurors shifted uncomfortably. One woman covered her mouth. A man in the gallery muttered, "That's evil." Then came Isaac Taylor, the 22-year-old falsely arrested by Barnes 2 years earlier. He stood in a crisp suit, voice shaking but unwavering, as he said, "I was walking home from work. He stopped me, called me a thief. I told him I didn't do anything, and he slammed me against a wall like I was a criminal." His words pierced the courtroom. The defense lawyer tried to object, tried to shift the narrative, but the tide had already turned. And then Evelyn took the stand. She stood tall, shoulders back, voice calm, but when she spoke, it felt like the very air shifted. "On that day," she said, "I wasn't a judge. I was just a woman in a hoodie going for a jog in my neighborhood. That's all it took to be treated like a suspect." She described in painful detail the humiliation of being cuffed on the street she had lived on for 12 years, the fear in that cold holding cell, the sting of Jack's slap across her cheek. Her voice never wavered, but her words hit like thunder. "This wasn't just about me," she told the court. "It was about power unchecked. It was about bias weaponized." The defense attorney, flustered, tried to suggest that Barnes was acting out of concern and misinterpreted behavior. But under cross-examination, even Jack Barnes began to unravel. His answers were inconsistent. His justifications sounded rehearsed. And when pressed on why he believed Evelyn was suspicious, his reply sealed his fate. "She didn't look like she belonged there," he muttered. The prosecutor paused, letting the silence linger like a blade. "You mean she didn't look like you expected someone in that neighborhood to look?" The jury's expressions hardened. The deliberations took nearly 6 hours. Outside, the sun had begun to set behind the courthouse, casting long shadows across the stone steps. People waited, prayed, cried. Then the doors opened. The jury filed in. The foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Jack Barnes, guilty on all counts: misconduct, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and falsifying official reports." Gasps filled the room. One woman clapped, unable to contain it. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, not in victory, but in vindication. Jack's head dropped. For the first time, he looked small. Not the badge, not the authority, just a man stripped of the power he had abused. The judge's gavel came down. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, but the damage was done. Jack Barnes was done. Outside, Evelyn addressed the crowd. "This is not the end," she said, standing before a sea of reporters, activists, and everyday citizens. "This is a beginning. One man's conviction doesn't heal the wounds, but it tells every person who has been silenced, profiled, or dismissed, you are not alone and justice can be served." Applause erupted. In the weeks that followed, policies began to shift. Officers across Texas were required to wear 24/7 body cams, including during breaks. Civilian review boards were formed in over 30 precincts. Racial bias training became mandatory across several states. And Evelyn Brooks, she returned to the bench with a renewed fire, but not just to rule, to lead. Because this trial didn't just convict one man, it put the system itself on notice, and America finally was listening. One judge, one verdict, one spark. How Evelyn Brooks had ignited a movement for change. The verdict had barely cooled when the ripple effects began. Judge Evelyn Brooks didn't just win a case, she flipped the script on a broken system. And America was ready. The video of her arrest had been viewed over 12 million times within the first 72 hours. Hashtags like #JusticeForJudge Brooks and #reform now flooded social media. Her calm voice, recorded as she asserted her rights through clenched fear, became the rallying cry of a new movement. But what came next was more than outrage, it was transformation. The first wave hit Houston. Within 10 business days, the city council passed an emergency ordinance requiring mandatory use of body cams for all police officers, no exceptions. Cameras had to remain a recording from the moment officers stepped out of their vehicles until the end of every encounter. No more malfunctions, no more missing footage. Every department in the county was required to keep at least 90 days of encrypted video backups, overseen by a third-party commission to ensure transparency. Then came the training overhaul. Police academies across Texas implemented 32 additional hours of de-escalation and racial bias training. Officers who failed the training more than once, suspended without pay. Those who refused to complete the training, dismissed. No more tolerance for gut instinct policing rooted in stereotypes. But it wasn't just police reform. Evelyn's story reignited conversations about power dynamics and racial inequity in broader public systems. Town halls in cities like Dallas, Atlanta, and St. Louis saw record turnouts. Over 15,000 people signed petitions demanding oversight of misconduct investigations be transferred from internal affairs to civilian-led boards. In just 1 month, 7 cities passed measures to make that shift. Still, Evelyn remained at the center, not seeking the spotlight, but refusing to step away from it. She returned to the courthouse just 2 weeks after the verdict, stepping onto the same bench she had left in handcuffs, but something was different. Her presence now symbolized both justice served and justice demanded. Local schools invited her to speak. Community centers organized Know Your Rights workshops using her case as a teaching tool. Churches preached about truth, dignity, and the power of standing firm. And across the nation, her name sparked conversations in unlikely places. On talk radio in Idaho, in church groups in Mississippi, on the evening news in Chicago, people saw in her story a painful mirror and a path forward. Corporate America took notice too. Several national retailers issued public statements acknowledging their role in perpetuating suspicious behavior narratives. One chain store committed to retraining over 20,000 employees to avoid racial profiling and ensure respectful engagement with all customers, regardless of zip code, hoodie, or receipt. Yet through it all, Evelyn remained grounded. She refused to monetize her story. She declined book deals. She turned down national interviews that wanted drama over depth. Instead, she partnered with advocacy groups, donating her speaking fees to legal aid nonprofits serving marginalized communities. She helped launch the E. Brooks Initiative, a grassroots organization focused on justice education, youth empowerment, and police accountability, starting in schools, not prisons. And she made time to listen. In one town hall in South Dallas, a mother stood up and said, "I've told my 16-year-old son to take off his hoodie every time he goes out at night. Because of you, I'm finally ready to teach him how to stand tall instead." Evelyn's eyes welled up, but she simply nodded and said, "We walk forward together." Politically, the momentum was impossible to ignore. Lawmakers in 8 states introduced legislation requiring transparency in internal police investigations, independent oversight panels, and faster response timelines for misconduct claims. A congressional committee requested Evelyn's testimony in a broader hearing on racial profiling. She agreed on one condition, that Isaac Taylor and other victims be allowed to speak as well. They did, and the hearing room fell silent when they did. The wave didn't stop there. In just 3 months, the Department of Justice launched an audit into police misconduct complaints across 5 major cities. Jack Barnes became a symbol, not just of a bad officer, but of what happens when systems refuse to change until someone forces them to. Evelyn Brooks forced them to, and yet ask her what she's most proud of, and she won't mention the policy changes or headlines. She'll tell you about a young girl in the park. "I want to be like you someday," the girl had said. That, Evelyn told a room of law students recently, is why I keep going. Not to fight the system, but to build a better one she can thrive in. Because in the end, Evelyn Brooks didn't just survive injustice, she turned it into a blueprint for change. In America, for once, it followed her lead. She didn't just win, she changed the rules. The legacy of Judge Evelyn Brooks. Some stories fade with time. This one didn't. Years after that quiet morning in Houston, after the arrest, the viral video, the courtroom battle, and the storm of reforms, Judge Evelyn Brooks is still a name spoken with reverence. But not because she sought fame, it's because she reshaped what justice means in modern America. The day Jack Barnes was convicted, the country witnessed something rare: accountability in real time. But the aftermath wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding. Evelyn never let it become about just her. She knew her story was a doorway to something greater. And she walked through it with the grace of someone who'd seen the system break and dared to imagine it whole again. Across all 50 states, her case became a touchstone in police training. Over 500 departments included the Brooks Protocol, a step-by-step training module built around escalation, conscious bias awareness, and the constitutional rights of citizens. Law professors used her case in mock trials. High school civics teachers printed out her transcripts for class discussion. She wasn't just in the news, she became part of the curriculum. But Evelyn didn't stop at influence. She built infrastructure. She helped open 3 community justice centers across Texas, each one offering free legal support, youth mentorship, and training for aspiring civil rights attorneys. These centers now serve over 20,000 people annually, from first-time offenders seeking restorative justice to families navigating wrongful arrests. To Evelyn, it was simple. We can't just fix broken systems, we have to build better ones next to them. And perhaps the most powerful legacy, she inspired a generation to rise. Applications to law schools across the South surged after her case, especially among young Black women. A national scholarship in her name, the Evelyn Brooks Fellowship for Justice, has already helped more than 300 students attend college, many of whom say they first learned her name from a YouTube video or a classroom debate. But Evelyn's impact wasn't just felt in policies or programs. It was personal. One fall afternoon, at a community garden in Houston, a retired bus driver named Charles approached her. He pulled out a crumpled photo from his wallet. It was of his grandson, Malik, wearing a graduation gown. "You don't know me," he said, voice trembling, "but because of you, my grandson didn't drop out after the police stopped him last year. He watched your story. He stayed in school. He's going to college now." Evelyn smiled, tears threatening to fall. "That's the real verdict," she replied softly. Still, not everything was easy. She faced threats, online abuse, endless questions about how she kept her composure. But her answer was always the same. "I didn't stay calm because I wasn't scared. I stayed calm because I refused to surrender my dignity." She could have walked away, retired, moved somewhere quiet, but she didn't. Evelyn Brooks still sits on the bench today. And when she enters the courtroom, people stand not just out of respect, but because they know she's earned it with every fiber of her being. Even those who once doubted her have come around. Some of the officers who stood silent during her arrest now volunteer at her justice centers. One even publicly apologized, saying, "I didn't speak up then, but she showed me how to do better." And Jack Barnes, his name rarely comes up now, not because people forgot, but because Evelyn's impact has overshadowed his legacy entirely. His story became a warning, hers became a roadmap. If you visit the park where she was arrested today, you'll find a bench with a plaque. It reads, "This is where she ran, this is where she rose," in honor of Judge Evelyn Brooks, whose courage changed the course of justice. Children play near it, couples walk by, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you might spot Evelyn herself, sitting quietly, watching the sunset, the same way she did that fateful morning. Only now the silence means something else. It's no longer heavy with fear. Now it's filled with hope, because Evelyn Brooks didn't just survive injustice. She turned it into light.